2:50, give or take a few minutes, because we got started later.
Got it. So I'll just keep a track on that and make sure that we get through the important stuff.
Okay.
Okay. All right, let me minimize the screen here so I can see my own. All right, so competency-based education. First of all, I didn't know that there was a Ken Traska fan club, so, I guess I'm late to the game. I'm going to have to join that. A little bit about what Arthur said here, a little bit of context there for those of you who are if you're joining this, you're probably, wanting to get information, and, I get it, about all of the compliance and regulatory stuff. What Arthur was talking about with Alverno was in the 1970s, a lot of people were trying this out when it first came out. And over a period of time, as you can well imagine, just like everything else, the regulation just got more and more and more, right? So for those people who were not involved early on, we started having to do more regulation in this area. The good news is it's not overly regulated. It's not very different than distance education. It's not very different from correspondence education. Things in which you do not have to use the credit hour in order to give credit and transcript the credit. So there are ways. So just once again, really clear, everybody who joins this, so that they're really clear before we go here. Your credit hour is assumed when you are accredited. So the assumption is you're accredited to teach these classes and you are using the credit hour, which is mandated by the federal government as to what those levels are. If you're not doing that and you're doing distance, there's a whole other set of rules, right? I have a whole bunch of stuff on the website that Karen and I did on that. You can look at that. If you're doing correspondence education, there's a whole other set of rules. You don't have to follow the federal credit hour, but you have to come to us if you're offering a program, which we need to approve that. And then there is also something called competency-based. And that's another way, a third way in which you do not need to meet the credit hour. However, it has a whole other set of rules and regulations. That's what this is about today, right? When does it hit that? What is the leeway we can do in order to do exactly what Arthur says? And we as an accreditor don't want to stand in the way of innovation. I know my boss has said that 1,000 times. I used to work for Arthur before I came to HLC, so I can tell you when I joined this agency, I knew that I was coming into a place in which we would not be holding back innovation. However, there are rules and regulations. We all have to follow it. That's what I'm here for. That's why you have a liaison. We'll walk through this together. The definitions of competency-based education, there are two big ones I want you to walk away kind of having a better idea about. When people say, we do CBE, I always say the next question is, which one, right? Because there's two. One is direct assessment, and the other is credit-based, competency-based education. So direct assessment, credit-based. I taught in a credit-based, competency-based program. That's what I'm very familiar with. Most people are familiar with that. And I would say out of all the ones we do, that is the one in which we receive the most applications. However, direct assessment is where you get the kind of flexibility that Arthur is talking about in many cases, right? Do we have institutions who do direct assessment? Yes, quite a few. I have one institution that does nothing but direct assessment programming. All programs are direct assessment. Two very, very different things. All right, so we have an application process for the approval of all of that. It's called subchange. For those of you who are coming to this session, you're quite familiar with that term. If you're not, then make sure you go on our website, because it's a huge part of what all presidents and ALOs interact with in between literally probably on a weekly basis, um, in between all the other stuff that we ask for, right? All right, so the typical CBE characteristics, this is the one that faculty ask about the most. What's the difference between the two? So let's look at the difference. With direct assessment, there's no traditional courses and there's no seat time. So the seat time that you have is dependent and very elastic. What does that mean? So I'm sure some of you might hear advertising from an institution that might say, we have a schedule that is your schedule. You get to create that schedule. It works with your life. It works with your family. It works with your job, right? That is appealing to a group of students who know that in any given time I might be called out, either in military or I might be called out to fly to Europe about an emergency that we have for my company. I'm going to miss 5 weeks of class, folks. I can't do this if you're going to ask me to be there for 5 weeks because I'm gone. I'm not even in the same time zone, and I don't even have access to internet. So when we talk about that kind of student, direct assessment really works the best for them. The course-based CBE, which I'm familiar with and which I taught most of my teaching career was actually in CBE. I've taught a variety of different methodologies. Most of those were either CBE or the credit hour. I taught maybe a few. Most people today have distance education teaching in their background. When I was teaching, unfortunately, I'm old enough to say to myself, there weren't distance education courses being offered. I'm really giving myself away here. But um, what I was attracted to, even in the 80s and 90s, was that CBE model, right? And what is this? So it's not the it's not the direct assessment. What is it? Um, you can, as a CBE student in a CBE program, work at a different pace. And it doesn't necessarily have to end in that 15-week, 12-week, 9-week, 6-week term, right? So in this particular case, you're seeking approval from HLC in order for you to be offering a program that's not within the traditional term that every other program is doing, right? Because they're all on 15 weeks, that everybody's going to class, everybody's doing what they do. But for this particular program, it doesn't work for them. And so what does it work for? Well, these are the students that um, I can say the ones that did really well in this program were the two ends of the spectrum of the bell curve. And this is my own personal experience, right? For those students who really needed more time, they needed more of my attention. They needed, for a variety of reasons, some of this material, it just took them longer. I also had students in which this was a great opportunity for them because they clearly had the ability to do this very quickly. And then it gave them the ability to kind of manage their life a little bit better, right? They can take assessments at any time. And don't forget, you have to, if you want to do this, you still have to figure out what your credit hour equivalencies are. So even though you don't have to meet the credit hour restrictions and all the rules and regulations about them, you do have to submit to us the credit hour equivalencies. But that's relatively easy to do because once you have this up and running, you kind of know what you're doing. It's just something that you do from semester to semester. One of the other things that's important to remember that's the academic performance is not about tallying credit hours or clock hours. It's about the competencies. So if I was to tell you from my own experience and why I like this model so much is that the hardest part of doing this is writing the competencies. And it's going to take you many times. For some of you who already have are offering some courses in this, you'll know what I mean because the competencies are what drives the assessment. It's what drives the student performance. And it's absolutely critical that you get that right, right? Now, with direct assessment, it would include what other types. You don't have to do the testing. You would do projects, papers, all that kind of stuff. Um, but the but with direct assessment, it can be over a longer period of time or a very short period of time, but the interaction um, with that student is going to be very different based on their individual goals and needs. That's the other thing I really liked was I got to be much closer to students. I felt because I taught in traditional programs with large classes, but I got to be a lot closer with students because I was trying to figure out what is it, where is your head? Where are you going with this? How can I help? What can I do to help you really feel confident that you're meeting the competencies, right? And so this competency is related, like I said, to the assessment. And when you talk about curriculum with CBE, it's really about how students are doing and how they're getting feedback as to how they're meeting the competency and the outcome of what we want them to do. There's a lot of similarities between this and teaching in a credit hour environment because over time, we've known how to write objectives, we've known how to write outcomes, we know that we have to do assessments in credit hour. So a lot of this stuff, if I was to have presented this in 1990, was really foreign to where you are now. So a lot of the stuff I'm telling you, you kind of already do. So making the leap between credit hour and maybe CBE is going to be a little bit easier today simply because we as an accreditor are asking for assessment programs and making sure that you understand, regardless of how they're learning, that you're collecting the assessment that they're really going to meet the outcomes. The other components that you want to make sure that you know before you go into this, it's really more curated. They're getting their information from a variety of sources, not just the faculty member. Again, because of LMS systems, this would have been unheard of 20, 30 years ago. But with the LMS systems, that really enables even people teaching in credit hour to get this from a variety of places. But I think with CBE, it's a little bit more on steroids there, right? This is where they pull in, or you say, you know, I'm going to have you talk to somebody, or why don't you go on a field trip over here? I'll set that up for you, so on and so forth. When you have a program, just make sure that the program that you create, that you're getting approved through us, really meets what it is that we're asking for to be a competency-based program. It's not just teaching a credit hour program, everybody shows up and they have to meet the competencies that you name that in your class. That's not a competency-based program. That's probably a good program and it's based on competencies and you're using that formula to move students through a traditional program. Nothing wrong with that, but that does not rise to the level of seeking approval through HLC. What does is when we meet that threshold of how it's being offered and really that flexibility, that ability to move over the necessary term if you want. There is something called the CBE Education Network. It's called CBEN. A lot of people, a lot of you have already reached out to them. They're a really great resource. I just want to give you a little bit of a heads up that Karen Solomon, who's our chief, one of the liaisons, of course, and she's been here a great deal of time, and she's certainly been a mentor to me, but she's also our chief innovation officer. And one of the things that she's doing this year is really kind of tackling our application system. So we're pulling in CBEN for that. So stay tuned for that. The only reason I bring that up is because I wanted you to know we work in partnership with these organizations. In many cases, we don't work against them, right? We really respect the fields in which we operate and the people that we work with. So I just wanted you to know that we do have a connection here, and you can use them to get additional information that they can help you with because they're quite familiar with having to seek approval through us when it gets to the point where you have a CBE program. There is a Dear Colleague letter, and that was from year 2014. To the best of my knowledge, until things change, and that could be tomorrow, and we're recording this, so please don't come after me later. But I think what you know right now, as of when this was done, we want to make sure that you understand what the letter actually says. The credit hour equivalencies are not the credit hour standards. So you do have to meet a credit hour equivalency, but there is the standard out there that we still use for that. So that gives you the guide, right? And so just make sure you keep this letter handy, because as you go forward with that, until which time we are told that the letter does not apply, we are still using that. Just like in distance education, we don't, in the federal government, when you do the credit hour, they usually tell you this is the proportion of time that we expect to do direct assessment and the proportion of time that we would expect you to do outside work, right? And that's typically on a 1/3, 2/3 basis. And when you look at regular and substantive interaction, when it comes to not meeting that, then what is it that you have to do, right? So regular interaction means that there has to be something there where the instructor is responsible for monitoring what's going on. So the CBE program does not mean go and do this, come back when you're ready, and I'll assign you a grade or I'll assign you a pass, or I will say you're ready to go on to the next module and I may never see you again, right? That that's not what CBE is. You still have to have regular and substantive interaction, just like you would if you were teaching distance education. In distance education, we have the very similar regular and substantive interaction. So this is not new to any of you. This is not different. It is very similar. However, as you can see, it is not a huge bar that's going to squash innovation here. But it is something that you have to pay attention to, because you have to do at least two of the following. You have to know that you're doing one of these or two of these things, or you can apply to us and say, there's something else you haven't thought of, Tom. Can we do this? So no one's done that yet, to the best of my knowledge, but you can do that. So you can see the flexibility here. What you can't do in your application, though, is ignore this, because this is a major part of when you submit your application. How is it that you're ensuring that you're doing this? And the best way to do that sometimes is a sample syllabus or some type of faculty handbook, or something that gives us an indication when we look at it, that everybody understands what this is and what they have to do as a faculty member who gets paid to do CBE on this campus. All right. Let's go over the application for direct and credit-based. These are things that we all have in common. We have to look at your credit hour equivalencies in relationship to the competency. If it's a course-based CBE, the equivalencies must account for any accelerated or compressed courses and include actual instructional time for the students. So, just make sure that you know that if you're saying that this is equivalent to that, how is that being done? A lot of flexibility here, a lot of resources to help you, a lot of people that can help you who have already done it. But if you look at this and you get caught up in that, we can easily help you. And how do you assess faculty and student engagement? Again, that gets back to that regular and substantive interaction. And then how do you evaluate education activity and academic and standard academic progress? Remember, this tends to be non-emulatory, right? So the type of program CBE is, and the reason why some students are really drawn to it, is that you can make it the best it can be, right? But your job as a faculty member and as an institution who is approved to do this is to stamp that approval on it, that they have met the competencies that they have set out to meet, that you were approved to do. That being said, just like in a credit hour class, some students will really get into this and they will just zoom on ahead and they will absolutely love it, right? I know I would have. I wish I had it when I was going to school. Um, and then finally, with the application itself that covers both the CBE course-based and the direct assessment, that includes the credit hour review for evaluating new proposals. But remember, these must be current. Sometimes we have institutions who submit something um, and they might have done it before or assumed that it was already done or already approved. You get to make sure that everything you're submitting to us is the current credit hour review, not one that might have been done 7 years ago, right? Okay, elements of quality practice. Now we're getting into the meat of it. How do you know if it's a good one, right? Do you have a philosophy and framework? Do you have faculty who really want to do this, or are they just going to be like dragged in here with the gun to their head and not really into it? And does it work for all the faculty? I don't know. Maybe not. There are some who really would not be drawn to this at all. Some are probably dying to do something like this, or at least try it, right? Is it consistent? Make sure that your policies are consistent, that you have protection and information for students on what this is and isn't. Remember, lately, and with all the counseling that I have received from legal at our office, the word of the day is transparency. And you see this in all of the stuff that we're seeing from the government. Right now, it's all about transparency. So we want to make sure that, if you have a quality practice CBE program, students know exactly what they're enrolling in. They know exactly how it's different and what the maybe the positives and negatives or the alpha delta of what this might be and what it might not be is, and the student has made their decision based on that, not because this is the only way I could get this credit, right? And like everything else, um, you really need to have a teach out option. This goes without saying, whenever you do something really new, and I just want to make sure I bring this up, um, I know you probably know it, you don't want me to say it, but the worst thing that could happen is you go out and you try this. It's going to take a while for the institution to get used to doing it. There's some students, however, no matter how good this program is, it was not for them. And there's a lot of reasons why it might not be for them, right? They really have to have some other way of getting the program they signed up for, or they're failing out of the program they signed up for, or they're going to change their majors, whatever it is. But there has to be another option for you to provide them a teach out, or another platform for students to where this one just wasn't working for them. And one of the things that I learned when I was teaching in the program, unlike a typical credit hour or credit-based program, when it came to coming into the program itself, not necessarily the university, but when it came coming into the program itself, you do yourself a favor by spending a whole lot of time up front interviewing the student, so that you make them read like what this is and what you're applying for and what program we offer here and what we expect. And if you lay it out and you make it really, really clear, the students should self-select appropriately. But if you don't do that, you might end up with a few students who probably signed up for something that they probably shouldn't have. There's two approaches. You can use the standard Carnegie unit, or you can do the equivalent amount of student coursework based on intended learning outcomes and verified by evidence of achievement. So when you're reviewing your credit hour and you have a new credit hour form, the reason this slide is in there, remember I said it should be current, right? You could do it two ways, and we get a lot of questions on this, so make sure you kind of keep this slide. I'm sure it'll be available, that they would give this to you, but you can always contact me as well. But you can use the Carnegie Standard or the equivalent amount of work. Now, correspondence, education, and competency-based. If I have to say one thing, and this goes for distance ed, right? If you don't have regular and substantive interaction, and you're teaching a CBE program, you're not teaching a CBE program. Period. You have to have regular and substantive interaction. And if you're not, and it's not working that direction, may I suggest that you seek correspondence approval through us, either by courses or programs, so that you are actually following policy and making sure that students understand that the credit they're getting for the course is based on the approvals that you have. Because, you know, at some point in time, we will ask the team to look at what it is you provided us in a panel review. And if your application does not look like it has substantive interaction, then may I suggest that this program might be better suited for competency or correspondence.
I hate to interrupt you. It's 2:52, so we want to give everyone about a 5-minute break. So if we can try to wrap it up in about 3 minutes. I don't know how many more slides or information you have to share.
They can read this on their own. I think I got through the big ones. This slide in approval, just know that there's the slide that's on this is probably one of the most important, and we'll stop. This is about CBE credit hour based programs. You need to have those approved for us for the first two. After that, you just send in a form of the change of program form and you add them at will, and we'll check them when we do a comp. If you're opting for the direct assessment program, you will go through us first, but then you will have to submit to the U.S. Department of Education for review and approval. So you can't offer that until you get their approval as well. So two big differences here. The CBE is the credit hour, and then the direct assessment program, though, is a big step up, and you have to make sure that the USDOE. You do not have to send the USDOE if you're doing the CBE credit hour based program. Just our approval is perfectly fine, and just the first two. After that, it's a notification. Okay.
Thank you so much. And Tom, I'm going to stop the recording now. Is it possible if you have